In 1952, a man crawled into Cave 3 at Qumran. He was part of an archaeological team working the Dead Sea cliff face, cataloguing the scroll fragments that had been emerging from the caves since a Bedouin shepherd accidentally stumbled into Cave 1 5 years earlier. He was not expecting anything unusual. What he found did not belong. Every other scroll in every other cave was written the way scrolls are written: ink on parchment, organic material, perishable. Most of what the team had recovered was fragmentary, the ancient leather crumbling, the writing faded, the text reconstructed line by line through painstaking scholarship. This was different. This one was metal. Copper, to be exact. 2 rolls of copper sheet riveted together, engraved with Hebrew text, not written, not inked, but pressed into the metal itself, as if whoever made it intended it to survive exactly the kind of destruction that had claimed everything else. The copper was so brittle from oxidation that the team could not unroll it. It sat in the Jordanian Museum in Amman for years before anyone could even read it. When they finally cut it open, in 1955 in Manchester, with a jeweler's saw, what they found was not scripture, not theology, not a psalm or a prophecy or a meditation on the divine. It was a list, 64 entries, location after location, each one describing a place where something had been hidden: gold, silver, sacred vessels, incense, temple offerings, and in one entry, described with particular specificity, a scroll of the law. The text read, and I am translating closely from the published version: in the cavity of the old house of tribute in the chain platform, there you will find it, a list engraved on metal, hidden in a cave, describing 64 concealment sites. The Dead Sea Scrolls Authority, which controlled access to the scrolls in that period, initially restricted the publication of the copper scroll. Most of the other scrolls were being shared among international scholars, photographed, catalogued, made available. The copper scroll was held back. It was published in full for the first time in 1960 by John Allegro, a British scholar who pushed for its release against the committee's preference. When I first read about that decision, that a list of hiding places was the text the committee wanted to sit on longest, I wrote a question in the margin of the paper I was reading. Why would you suppress a list? A religious text, even a controversial one, the committee might have delayed for theological reasons. A prophecy, a gospel, a polemic, there are institutional reasons to be cautious. But a list of locations, you suppress a list when you are afraid someone might use it. I need to show you what is beneath Solomon's temple before I can show you why any of this matters, because the ground beneath the Temple Mount is not empty. It never was. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, describes the infrastructure of Solomon's temple with the specificity of an eyewitness working from priestly records. In Book 15 of his Antiquities, he mentions cisterns, not 1 or 2 cisterns for basic water storage, 37 cisterns carved into the bedrock beneath the temple platform, forming an interconnected network. Solomon's temple required an extraordinary volume of water. The daily sacrifices, the ritual washings, the maintenance of the sacred precincts, all of it demanded a constant massive supply. The Mishnah Midot, the ancient tractate describing the temple's dimensions in precise detail, mentions a spring beneath the altar, the Ein Etam spring. Its underground path has never been fully traced. One of the cisterns that Warren catalogued in 1867, I will come to Warren shortly, was large enough that he labeled it the Great Sea. He estimated its capacity at approximately 2 million gallons. 2 million gallons of water held in a carved chamber beneath the Temple Mount, and the cistern is still there. It has never been excavated. What connects to it has never been mapped. What lies beneath it has never been examined. This is not a mystery from the ancient world. This is a question that modern archaeology has the tools to answer and has been legally prevented from asking. Let me take you to 1867. A British Army officer named Charles Warren is given a commission by the Palestine Exploration Fund to conduct surveys of Jerusalem and the surrounding area. Warren is a royal engineer, meticulous, methodical, the kind of man who keeps precise field notes and files comprehensive reports. He arrives at the Temple Mount and immediately encounters the problem that has defined every archaeological engagement with this site. He cannot dig on the mount itself. The Ottoman authorities have restricted access. The religious sensitivities of three faiths converge on this patch of ground in a way that makes direct excavation impossible. So Warren does something ingenious. He digs around it. He sinks 27 shafts in the ground surrounding the Temple Mount. He excavates laterally from those shafts, approaching the foundations of the platform from the sides. And then he goes down. Using a rope and a candle, Warren descends 40 meters below the surface into a vertical shaft that now bears his name, Warren's Shaft. At the bottom, the shaft opens into a horizontal tunnel. The tunnel leads toward chambers that predate the Roman destruction of the temple in 70 AD, chambers that no one had entered in centuries. Warren maps what he can. He catalogues 37 cisterns, matching Josephus's count exactly, across 1800 years. He finds passages that connect the cisterns. He documents archways, carved niches, spaces whose purpose is not entirely clear. And in several locations he stops. His field notes, which I had the opportunity to examine in the original at the Palestine Exploration Fund archive in London, I will come to that, record specific chambers that he could not enter. Not because of ancient locks or sealed doors, because of debris and structural risk. The chambers were there. The passages leading to them were there. He simply could not get through. He wrote, in his own handwriting, next to the cross-sections of those chambers, "Further investigation required. Access blocked." In 1884, when his account was published, the detailed cross-sections of the sub-chambers below the southeastern corner of the mount were omitted, not lost. Omitted. The published version of Warren's findings is not the complete version. The question marks he put on those drawings in pencil are still on the original paper, in London, in an archive, unanswered. I want to stop here and tell you something personal. I was 26 years old and in my second year of research at SOAS, when my supervisor arranged access for me to the PEF archive. The Palestine Exploration Fund archive holds the original field materials from decades of British archaeological work in the Levant. Not the published accounts, the originals. I remember sitting at a reading table in that archive with Warren's actual drawings in front of me. Not reproductions, the hand-drawn cross-sections themselves, the pencil lines he made while standing at the bottom of shafts 40 meters below Jerusalem. The chambers were drawn in careful detail, the dimensions noted, the connections to the cistern network indicated with dotted lines. And in several places the question marks. Not one, multiple question marks beside chambers he had located but could not enter. I had read the published version of Warren's survey. I had read the scholarly literature that cited it. None of it had told me about the question marks. I sat there for a long time with those drawings. Eventually I found the correspondence files, the letters between Warren and the PEF leadership about the conditions of his survey. There was a letter from 1867, a brief note, almost administrative in tone, from the Ottoman authorities. Permission for further descent had been withdrawn. No explanation, just withdrawn. Warren's question marks on those drawings are 150 years old. The chambers they point to have not been entered since. Now I need to show you the most significant piece of recent evidence, because this is not ancient history. This is not 1867. This is 1999. When Israeli archaeologists extended the Western Wall tunnel northward, they exposed the full course of Herodian masonry along the base of the Temple Mount's western face. What they found in that course of stones is still sitting there, visible to any visitor who walks through the tunnel today. One stone, a single ashlar block that measures approximately 13.6 meters long, 3.3 meters high, 4.6 meters deep. The estimated weight is 570 metric tons. For context, the two largest blocks in the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh approximately 70 tons each. This stone weighs more than 8 of those combined. It is, as far as modern archaeology has been able to determine, the largest quarried building stone in the ancient world. No one has explained how it was moved. The engineering required to quarry, transport, and place a stone of that mass using the technology available in the 1st century BC exceeds any documented construction capability from that era. It is sitting there, documented, measured, photographed, unremarked in the popular presentation of the site, and directly beneath this stone, the tunnel ends. The excavation stopped there, at that stone, at the edge of the unexcavated section. In 1996, when the Israeli government opened a second entrance to the Western Wall tunnel, an exit that brought the tunnel route beneath the Muslim quarter of the Old City, Palestinian riots erupted. 80 people died. The riots halted the excavation permanently. The decision to halt was made by the Israeli cabinet, not by archaeologists. The tunnel, at its northern end, had reached to within 27 meters of the spot where, in Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies stood. 27 meters. And then they stopped. Now I want to show you why all of this matters in a way that goes beyond archaeology. Because the question beneath the Temple Mount is not just a question about stones and cisterns. It is a question about what Solomon did when he knew the temple was going to fall. Here is what 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 through 9 actually says. God tells Solomon explicitly, "If you or your descendants turn away from following me, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them. I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name." Solomon built the temple knowing it would be destroyed. This is not speculation. This is not a hidden interpretation. It is there in the text. The wisest man the ancient world produced, who according to the biblical tradition, understood the architecture of the spiritual world more completely than any person before or since, who understood the nature of the forces that govern human affairs. That man built a temple he had been told would be destroyed. The question scholars almost never ask is, what did Solomon do to prepare for that destruction? Here is where the Geniza principle becomes essential. Jewish law, codified in the Talmud in Tractate Shabbat, chapter 115, and amplified through the Mishnah and later legal authorities, establishes a fundamental obligation. Sacred objects containing the name of God cannot be destroyed. They must be buried, hidden, placed in a geniza, a concealment chamber, where they will be preserved even as the structures around them fall. This is not a marginal practice. This is the codified law of an entire civilization. To this day, worn Torah scrolls, prayer books, documents containing divine names, none of them can be simply discarded. They are buried in consecrated ground, in dedicated Geniza chambers. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in the temple's Holy of Holies, contained the tablets inscribed with the name. Under the Geniza principle, the priests who served the temple had a legal obligation. If the temple was going to fall, and they knew it was going to fall, and they were following the law they had been given, they would have hidden the ark. The question is not whether they would have followed that law. They followed every other law in exhaustive detail. The temple's operations were a masterpiece of systematic observance. The question is where? And the answer, if you follow the logic of the Geniza principle, is almost geometrically obvious. The most natural place to hide the most sacred object of the building designed to house it is beneath the building itself, in a chamber. In the network of chambers that Solomon, who knew the temple would fall, had the architectural genius and the 30-year construction timeline to prepare. In the chambers that Charles Warren found in 1867 and could not enter. Beneath the 570-ton stone where the excavation stopped, 27 meters from where the Holy of Holies stood. Now I want to bring you back to the Copper Scroll, because the Copper Scroll is not just anomalous. The Copper Scroll is evidence of a practice. It is evidence that first-century temple Jews, the community at Qumran, connected to the priesthood, aware of the Roman threat, preparing for the fall of the Second Temple, systematically hid sacred objects, not metaphorically, operationally. They made a list. They used metal instead of parchment, because metal survives. They buried the list in a cave. The Copper Scroll is the operational documentation of a Geniza program at scale. 64 locations, specific quantities, specific descriptions. Several of the entries describe locations beneath or near the Temple Mount. The entry I mentioned earlier, in the cavity of the old house of tribute in the chain platform, is believed by some scholars to describe a subchamber of the temple platform itself. The location has never been investigated. The Dead Sea Scrolls Authority restricted the Copper Scrolls publication for 30 years. When scholars began to take seriously the possibility that the Copper Scroll was not symbolic but operational, that it was a real list of real hiding places containing real objects, the institutional response was not enthusiasm. The response was dismissal. The consensus position, repeated across decades of academic literature, was, the Copper Scroll cannot be taken literally. The amounts are too large. The locations are unclear. It is almost certainly a literary exercise. I remember my professor at SOAS saying exactly that. The Copper Scroll is not taken seriously as a literal list, he said. I wrote in the margin of my notes, why not? And then, after a pause, I wrote the question that has stayed with me since. What if the reason we don't take it seriously is precisely because it's too literal? What if the reason three faiths agree the Copper Scroll is symbolic is that the alternative is a set of excavation coordinates? I want to show you something about the destruction of evidence that has already occurred. Because the question beneath the Temple Mount is not only about what has not yet been found, it is also about what has already been lost. In the years 1996 to 1999, the Islamic Waqf, the religious authority that administers the Temple Mount, excavated a large underground space on the southern end of the platform, known as Solomon's Stables, to create a new mosque called the Marwani Mosque. Approximately 10,000 tons of earth and debris were removed from the site. No archaeological supervision was present. The earth was taken and dumped in the Qumran Valley. In 2004, two Israeli archaeologists named Gabriel Barkay and Zaki Devira launched what became known as the Temple Mount Sifting Project. They obtained permission to sift through the discarded earth. What they found in material that had been treated as rubble, First Temple period seal impressions. Bulli, the clay seals used to authenticate ancient documents, dating to the period of Solomon's successors, Hasmonean coins, Second Temple period architectural fragments, Herodian flooring tiles, and most significantly, fragments of pottery consistent with First Temple period origin. From the period of Solomon, in the dumped earth that the Waqf considered construction waste, what else was in those 10,000 tons is not recoverable. Whatever was there in the strata beneath the Temple Mount, in the layers that accumulated from Solomon's construction, through the Babylonian destruction and beyond, a portion of it is now in a landfill. And what remains beneath the untouched sections of the mount is sealed off by political agreement, guarded by the convergence of three faiths who agree, for entirely different reasons, that the ground should not be opened. Here is what I find most significant about the archaeology of the Temple Mount. Not any single finding, the agreement. The State of Israel controls the Western Wall and the Western Wall tunnel. The Islamic Waqf controls the surface of the Temple Mount, including the dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Vatican holds significant influence in the custodianship arrangements of Jerusalem's holy sites, going back to the agreements of the post-Ottoman period. Three deeply opposed institutions, three faiths that have spent centuries in theological and political conflict with each other, and they are in complete agreement on one point. Systematic archaeological excavation beneath the Temple Mount should not occur. The Israeli government's position is that excavation is blocked by political sensitivity, that any disturbance of the mount would trigger instability in the region, and the risk is too great. The Waqf's position is that the ground belongs to the Islamic heritage of the site, and excavation amounts to desecration. The Vatican's position, expressed through diplomatic channels over decades, is that the status of Jerusalem's holy sites is a matter for international resolution, and unilateral archaeological action is inappropriate. Three opposing institutional frameworks. One shared conclusion. I am a scholar. I try not to draw conclusions beyond what the evidence supports. But I will say this: when three deeply opposed institutions that agree on almost nothing else, converge on the same prohibition, that convergence is itself an archaeological fact. It is worth examining what they all have to lose from the same discovery. Let me state the possibility clearly because I think clarity is more useful than circumspection here. Beneath the Temple Mount, there are cisterns that have not been entered in centuries. There are chambers Warren documented in 1867 and could not access. There is a 570-ton stone sitting above unexcavated ground, 27 meters from where the Holy of Holies stood. There is a legal principle, the Geniza obligation, that would have compelled the temple's priests to hide the ark before the Babylonians arrived in 586 BC. There is a copper scroll that documents, in operational detail, a systematic program of hiding temple treasure. A program that was real enough to be worth engraving in copper, real enough to be suppressed for 30 years. What might be found if someone with proper archaeological equipment were allowed to excavate beneath that 570-ton stone, beneath the spot where Warren stopped, beneath the level where the question marks are, is not something I can tell you, nobody can tell you, not because the question is unanswerable, because no one has been allowed to ask it with a trowel. If it is the Ark, then the most sacred object in 3 religious traditions would be found beneath a site claimed by all 3. The implications for theology, for the legitimacy of competing claims, for the political architecture of Jerusalem. I do not need to spell this out. If it is something else, if what Solomon built beneath the temple to survive the destruction is not the Ark, but something we do not yet have a category for, the implications might be stranger still. 1 Kings, chapter 8, verse 12. Solomon says, "When he has completed the temple and the ark has been placed in the Holy of Holies, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness." Thick darkness. Solomon built a room, the most elaborately constructed interior space in the ancient world, in which the most sacred object of his civilization was placed. And the room was dark, no windows, no light. The priests who entered the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement entered a darkness so complete that their only guidance was the sound of bells sewn into their robes, so that those waiting outside could hear if they fell. The God of Solomon dwelt in darkness. Solomon, who wrote Ecclesiastes, who understood that all things built above the earth return to dust, built something in the darkness, beneath the earth, not for the civilization that would come after, for what he believed was worth preserving beyond the civilization. What he built above the ground has been destroyed twice. What he built beneath the ground is still there. Let me give you the posture that this investigation requires. Not a spiritual practice this time, an investigative one. The first step is to understand the geography. The Temple Mount is the only major archaeological site on Earth where systematic excavation is actively blocked by international political agreement. This is not a claim. This is the documented status of the site. It is unique in the world. Nowhere else has a site of this significance been left systematically unexcavated for political reasons. Knowing this is the beginning of the correct posture. You are not dealing with a mystery that has been investigated and found empty. You are dealing with a mystery that has been deliberately sealed. The second step is to read the copper scroll. John Allegro's 1960 translation is available. The full text is not long. Read it as what it is, an operational document, not a theological one. Read it as a logistics officer would read a manifest. Note the specificity, note the quantities, note the locations. Ask yourself, what does this read like to you? Because I have asked that question to many people who came to it without academic preconceptions, and the most common answer is the same. It reads like a real list. The third step is to apply the Geniza principle. Solomon knew the temple would fall. 1 Kings 9 is explicit. He had 30 years to prepare for it. He had the architectural knowledge and the workforce to build anything beneath the mount that he chose to build. What would you have built if you knew what was in the Holy of Holies, and you knew the temple was going to be destroyed, and you had a legal obligation to preserve the name? The fourth step is to sit with the agreement. The Israeli government, the Islamic Waqf, the Vatican. 3 opposed institutions, 1 shared position. Ask why. Not rhetorically. Actually ask it. What does each of these institutions have at stake in what might be found beneath the Temple Mount? What would each of them need to suppress or manage or reframe if an excavation revealed what the Geniza principle, the Copper Scroll, and Warren's question marks all point toward? The answer to that question is not archaeology. It is politics dressed in the language of religion, and politics, unlike bedrock, can be moved. I want to close with something Solomon wrote, not in 1 Kings, not in Proverbs, in Ecclesiastes, the book that scholars have wrestled with for 3,000 years because it does not read like anything else in the Hebrew Bible. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." Solomon was not a man who believed in permanence above the earth. Ecclesiastes is the most ruthless demolition of the idea of lasting achievement in the entire ancient canon. Vanity of vanities. Everything under the sun is vapor. And yet he built the temple. He built it knowing it would fall. He built it with 30,000 conscripted laborers and 80,000 quarrymen and 70,000 carriers, according to 1 Kings 5. He built the most elaborate structure in the ancient world, and he knew it was vapor, unless the point was not what was above the ground, unless Ecclesiastes is not a contradiction to the temple, but an explanation of it. Solomon understood that nothing built above the earth lasts. What he placed beneath the earth in the thick darkness, where God said he would dwell, he built that for something else, not for the civilizations that would come and go above it. For what he believed no civilization should be permitted to lose. The question is not whether something is down there. The structural logic of the Geniza principle, the Copper Scroll, Warren's question marks, the 570-ton stone, the unanimous agreement of 3 faiths to leave it sealed, all of that points to the same answer. The question is, what Solomon believed was worth hiding. What he considered too important to be left to the mercy of the Babylonians or the Romans or the Crusaders or the Ottoman administrators who withdrew Warren's permission to descend. What he built in the thick darkness. What is still there. Think about that tonight. And if you find yourself asking the question that Warren wrote in pencil next to those chambers 150 years ago, if you find yourself drawing a small question mark next to something that should have been answered long ago and hasn't been, that question mark is not ignorance. That question mark is the beginning of the right kind of attention. Solomon built the temple with the answer to that question already inside it. The question is still waiting.